By April 1945, after nearly 6 years of intense combat, the Red Army had reached the Oder River, just 60 kilometers from Berlin. The Nazi capital, which had once been a symbol of Germany's advance into the Soviet Union, now stood at the brink of destruction. Hitler's bunker lay just within reach, yet both the Nazi Party and the Wehrmacht were determined to fight until the bitter end, in a desperate bid to hold off the advancing Soviet forces. The German army, now far from its peak strength, was preparing for a last-ditch defense. The Soviets, meanwhile, had amassed an overwhelming force: 2.5 million men, 6,000 tanks, 40,000 artillery pieces, and thousands of aircraft, all pushing for the final assault on Berlin. Their plans were to launch a multi-pronged attack on the capital, with Marshal Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front attacking from the Silo Heights, Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front moving from the south, and Rokossovsky's 2nd Belarusian Front holding the northern flank. Facing the Soviets were around 1 million German soldiers, bolstered by poorly trained and ill-equipped units, such as the Volkssturm. Their defensive positions were mostly hastily prepared, and confusion reigned among the German commanders. Despite these setbacks, German soldiers fought tenaciously, driven by a mix of fear, loyalty, and belief in the myth of Hitler's miracle weapons. On April 16, 1945, the Battle of Berlin began with a massive Soviet artillery barrage. German defenses at Silo initially held, but as the Soviet forces pressed forward, their advance became bogged down. Zhukov made the decision to send tanks into the fight prematurely, resulting in confusion and heavy losses. Despite these challenges, by April 19th, the Soviets had broken through German lines and were heading west towards Berlin. By April 25th, Soviet forces had encircled Berlin. Despite their superiority in numbers and firepower, the city's defenders created a maze of obstacles, using barricades and fortified positions to slow the Soviet advance. However, with morale in tatters and the leadership in disarray, the defenders could do little to stop the Red Army. Hitler's unrealistically optimistic plans for counterattacks collapsed, and many high-ranking Nazis fled the city. The situation inside the city was chaotic. German civilians and soldiers, caught in the middle of the relentless fighting, suffered immensely. As Soviet forces advanced, desperate civilians fled to shelters, only to find themselves in the crossfire. German and Soviet soldiers alike looted, executed prisoners, and committed atrocities against each other. Soviet troops, embittered by the years of war and suffering, carried out widespread rapes and massacres, though many were later unpunished for their crimes. Despite heavy losses, the Red Army pressed forward, employing urban warfare tactics that had been honed in Stalingrad. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and every street became a battleground. The Germans made their final stand in the city's central Z-zone, including the Reichstag, a symbol of Nazi power. On May 1st, Soviet forces raised the red flag over the Reichstag, signaling the fall of Berlin. As the fighting reached its climax, Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives in the Führer bunker, marking the symbolic end of the Third Reich. The surrender of Berlin came on May 2nd, 1945, but not before the city had been devastated. In total, the battle claimed over 80,000 Soviet lives and up to 100,000 German soldiers and civilians. With the fall of Berlin, the war in Europe was effectively over, though the suffering continued for many. As the situation in Berlin deteriorated, several groups of Germans made desperate attempts to break out of the city. These final efforts were often led by remaining SS units and military commanders. Among those trying to escape was Georg Diers, a German tank commander. His harrowing account of the attempt to break through Soviet lines paints a grim picture of the chaos. He recalls having to leave behind wounded comrades who begged for a quick death, as Soviet artillery and infantry rained down on their forces. The grimness of these final days highlighted the futility of resistance. When General Weidling finally ordered the surrender of Berlin on May 2, 1945, the city lay in ruins. The once mighty capital of the Nazi regime had been reduced to rubble, with the streets littered with the bodies of soldiers and civilians alike. The intense urban combat had left the city unrecognizable, and the horrors witnessed by both soldiers and civilians during the final days of the battle became part of a larger narrative of devastation that defined the closing months of the war in Europe. For the Soviets, the victory in Berlin was not only a military triumph, but a symbolic end to the war against Nazi Germany. The Red Army had suffered over 80,000 casualties, and the intense fighting left deep scars in both the soldiers and the civilian population. Though Berlin was captured and its fall signaled the end of the war in Europe, the lasting impact of the battle would echo for decades in the form of Soviet occupation, the eventual division of Germany, and the tensions that fueled the Cold War. The Battle of Berlin marked a definitive end to Nazi Germany, but it also set the stage for a new phase in Europe's history. For the Soviet Union, the victory was a moment of ultimate retribution for the destruction and suffering caused by the Nazis, but it also meant the beginning of Soviet control over Eastern Europe and the onset of the Cold War. Berlin's fall saw the city split into sectors controlled by the Allies, laying the groundwork for the Berlin blockade and the eventual division of Germany. For the millions who had endured the horrors of the war, the Battle of Berlin marked both the end of the Nazi nightmare and the beginning of a new struggle under foreign occupation. Holocaust survivors, forced laborers, and Soviet POWs were freed, but the psychological scars of war, as well as the physical devastation, remained. As Soviet forces put up memorials across Berlin to honor the sacrifices made, the city's transformation symbolized the changing world order. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the tumultuous final days of the Battle of Berlin in 1945. The events we've explored today are a powerful reminder of the devastation of war and the courage and resilience of those who lived through it. If you found this video insightful, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth documentaries and historical analyses. Your support helps us continue to bring these crucial stories to light, so don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Feel free to share your thoughts and any questions you have in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.